Welcome to the Suffolk Sewing Circle of the Suffolk Public Library. Thank you for joining us today. This will be our last sewing tutorial for 2021. Today we will be making these cute Santa gnomes out of some craft materials as well as some materials you may be able to upcycle from around your house. This is a great project for beginner sewists and sewists of all ages, as it uses primarily basic hand sewing techniques. You could substitute some elements of this program with machine sewing, although hand sewing is the recommended technique. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. Okay, so to begin our Santa gnome project, I just want to start by talking about the pattern pieces that I created. If you're joining us from home, feel free to make your own pattern pieces that are similar to these. So essentially you have the pieces that make up the body, and then his hat and gloves, and then beard. So the body piece is going to make a cylinder, so this will attach to the base to make a cylinder like this. Then you have two rectangles that you'll cut for arms, so cut two of those, and those should all be out of one fabric because that's going to look like the sweater that he's wearing. And then I'm going to make my hat out of a contrasting fabric so that it looks like it's a separate piece of his outfit. I'm going to use felt for his mittens, so I'll cut two of those. And then I have a piece of craft fur for his beard. So just to go over what pieces I'm going to use for each thing, I have a nice piece of, this is fleece for his sweater, and that will be all the body pieces here. You could also use a sweater fabric or wool or any sort of winter weight fabric you have around. This is a great project to repurpose some old clothes. So if you've worn out some old sweaters or pajama bottoms or anything like that from previous winters, this is a cool way to repurpose those materials. And so this is what I'm going to use for his sweater. That's those main pieces there. And then for his hat, I'm going to give him a solid red hat to go with his green and red sweater. I'm going to be using this piece of craft fur to make a beard. So that obviously looks like too big for this piece here, but you're going to see why that is. I'm going to be shaping the beard once I attach it, so more on that coming up. For embellishments, I have a little button as well as a little pom-pom for the end of his hat. You could feel free to use a ribbon or anything like that to embellish as well. Just do it to your liking, whatever is festive to you. We need a nose, and so you have an option of either using a wooden bead, or you can put a pom-pom in a piece of nylon. So that's two different options there. Whichever one you happen to have on hand would work fine. You will need a rubber band to put together the top of the body. You'll need a little piece of felt that I'm going to use for the mittens. And then you'll need something to stuff his hat with that's a little bit light and fluffy. So this is a piece of batting I've kind of pulled apart into some fluff. You could use fiber fill or something like that as well. And then you need something weighted to fill the body with so that he'll sit upright on a table. So you could use beans, you could use rice. Those are sort of natural materials to use. You could also use the kinds of filling that you use for dolls and things like that if you have that on hand. But anything that's heavy, that's going to hold up well over the years would be great. And then I have my needle and thread of matching colors. So if you're joining us from home without a library kit, those are more or less the materials you'll need. And so I'm going to cut out my pieces and show you how to get started. Okay, So the first thing that we're going to do is put the body together, and that is by making the cylinder. Now you can pin this ahead of time if you'd like. I think it's going to be easier to show you not pinning it, just that way I can adjust as I go. Feel free to also do this on a sewing machine. I'm choosing to do it by hand because I think it's a little bit easier to demonstrate going kind of slow. If you prefer to use your sewing machine, that's also a fine idea too. So the first thing we're going to do is put our right sides together as so. So this is the right side of my circle on the right side of my rectangle here. I also want to point out that I have doubled up my thread. That makes it double strong as I'm sewing. And so I'm going to start just on one top corner here. And I'm going to use a whip stitch just to hold these two pieces together. And let me zoom in a little bit so you can see better what I'm doing. It's a little bit hard to see with these busy fabrics. Okay, so we're just going to start by anchoring our stitch like this. And what we're going to do is keep our stitches pretty close together so that they'll be nice and secure, because remember, we're going to fill these up with beans or rice. You want to especially tight if you're going to use rice, because those little pieces will slip out. Okay, so as I get started, I'm going to continue to wiggle my circle so that it continues to touch the edge of the rectangle. So I'll turn it a little bit and place a few more stitches. This is probably the hardest part of this project, so good thing we're going to get that done first. If this is a little bit confusing, don't get discouraged. Just take your time with it. And so again, it's almost like we're going to roll the circle down as we go, if that makes sense. So we'll just continue to turn it, and you'll notice this starts to take a 3D shape as we keep going. So as you can see, it's starting to curl up, which is going to get a little awkward as we go, but we're just going to keep stitching around. Essentially, we're putting together the very bottom of our gnome. And as I said, it's going to keep curling up as you go, because we're sewing in a circle. So that's the correct way. If you're like, this is a little bit strange, that's what it's supposed to look like. Kind of think about the shape of like an oatmeal container. We're kind of doing the seam around the bottom. So if you were to pop that cardboard circle out of the bottom of an oatmeal container, that's kind of what this shape is going to look like when we're finished. So we keep placing a few stitches and then curling it a little bit more. And as you can see, we're not quite halfway there, but it's starting to come together like this. So we'll just keep going. And as we get to where it's coming pretty close to being a finished circle, we have a little bit left, and we don't want to quite finish that off because we're going to put together our side seam and then close the rest of the circle at the bottom. So that's a good place to tie it off for right now. So I'm just going to tie my knot right here. Alright, so I'm just going to tie this off here. And now I have my side seam put together, as you can see here, and I'm ready to go and finish closing this part. So now I'm going to just complete my circle. As you can see, I still have a little bit of a hole here I have to close. So I just wanted to be sure that I was able to put together my side seam and I didn't overshoot my circle somehow. Looks like I have plenty of space though, so that worked out nicely. So I'm just going to start where I left off here and just continue all the way around to where I left off on the other side. Again with my double thread. And as you get to that side seam you just did, you can kind of see how, I'm going to zoom in, you'll just connect it with a little bit extra on your seam here, and that's fine, so don't worry about that. Flatten it as much as you can. You can see you're going to go to each side of that little seam there, making double sure that it's really closed. And now that I am all the way around, I'm going to tie it off one more time with a double knot. And then I turn it right side out to make sure that I have nice secure seams, and looks like I have a little loose thread here, so it's okay to snip that. Good deal there. Yeah. So now we have a nice little cylinder that we've made. So now we're going to be working on the arms of the body. So first we're going to put our right sides together, folding our arm piece in half, and I'm going to just do the side seam with a whip stitch with my double thread. Again, we're going to be making this so that it's inside out, and then we'll turn it right side out so that our seam is on the inside. Again, making a little tube, kind of like we did with our body piece. Putting our stitches pretty close together so that they're nice and tight, so that when we stuff the arm, it holds its stuffing. When we get to the end, we'll tie it off. And then we're going to turn this right side out before we attach our mitten piece. And this is going to be tough because it is a skinny little tube, but just take your time with it. You have to kind of push and pull it a little bit. Alright, so now that it's right side out, I'm going to tuck one end under a little bit so that the raw edge is tucked in, like so. And that way we can put our mitten in. So the important thing about the mittens is we want them going opposite directions. So we have a right hand and a left hand. I've already done one of them here, so I'm going to do this one the opposite way. So into the end that I have tucked under, I'm just going to insert the bottom of the mitten, like that. And then I'm going to use a running stitch to attach it. Now I just double checked that I did it the same way here. So when our seam is showing seam side up, we want that right in the middle of our mitten. So I'm going to do my other mitten the opposite with my seam right in the middle. Okay, so just double checking my work there. To attach the mitten, we are going to first start our needle going in. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it actually. One second. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with our needle going in like this so that our knot is on the inside of the sleeve. And so now I'm going to go in and out like this to do a running stitch. So I'll go this way, making sure to go through the felt as well as both the front and back of the sleeve. So I will just go back and forth like this. And this is closing our sleeve so we can fill it up. So do make sure that it's on there securely. We are going to close it and attach our mitten at the same time. And to make sure we do that, I'm actually just going to go back the way I started and end up where I left off. Just to be really sure that it's attached securely. Right, and I can tug it and make sure it's really secure, and it is. And so we will just tie this off and we're finished with our sleeve. So now we're going to fill up the body pieces so that they're three-dimensional. So the first thing we're going to do is fill our arms up with fiberfill or batting, something fluffy that will hold its shape without being heavy. And so I've filled this first one with some torn up batting I had left over from another project. As you can see, it's nice and secure. It is going to condense as you press it in there, so it's going to take more than you think it will. But I'm going to show you how I did that with the other arm. So it's a little bit tricky because it is a skinny little slot, but I'm going to take my batting pieces that I've kind of fluffed up a little bit, and I'm going to get them started in here like this. And this is where you'll need like a pencil or a pen, or in this case I have my seam ripper just kind of in its case, and I'm just going to use that to kind of shove that in there. It's going to take some maneuvering, but just kind of wiggle it down to the bottom. And as you can see, that big fluffy piece only filled up like the wrist of the sleeve, so I'm going to need lots more batting. So I'm just going to take another piece and squeeze it in there. Takes a little bit of finagling. But I'm just going to keep stuffing until I have enough. So I'm just going to cut another piece of batting here for stuffing. Just making sure I've got enough in there. And you want it so that it's pretty much to the top, though not exactly to the point where it's overfilled. You do want to be able to pinch it closed at the top, but I shouldn't be able to fit my whole finger tip in there, so I need a little bit more batting. Just kind of cut a little as you go until you figure out how much you need. It's amazing how much it condenses in there when you go to push it, though. Alright, so that looks about right. You want to push it in there enough that the arm doesn't look lumpy. So make sure it's nice and tight. I'm actually going to give this one just a little bit more so that it's nice and even with the other one. Alright, that should do it. So you just kind of wiggle it to make sure it's evenly distributed. And there we go. Our arms are full now. The next thing we're going to do is take our body piece, and we have our nice cylinder shape here, and we're going to fill it. In this case, I'm going to put beans. So I'm going to hold it open like a bag, like this. And then I'm just going to pour my beans. Beans in here like this. Oops. And I dropped a few. Alright, and so as you can see, that's not quite full, because what I want to be able to do is have it full enough that I can just gather the top like this. It's a little bit hard to do upright, but I want just a little bit that I can gather and hold together with a rubber band. And as you can see, that's a little bit loose still, so I'm going to need some more beans. I'm just going to keep adding until it's full enough for my liking. As you can see, as I add more beans in there, it sits upright very nicely. It'll have no problem keeping its shape. Alright, so if I test it out again, I can see I'm pretty satisfied that it's full now. It's got a nice dense shape, and I'm ready to secure this on the top. So now I have my rubber band, and I'm just going to pinch it on top like this. Get it as secure as you can, and then just kind of squish it until it's the right shape. So now I have all my parts filled. I'm going to make sure that my seam is going to be on the back side. So I'm going to turn it like this, and I'm going to attach my arms like this. So again, I want to make sure that my thumbs are the right way. We don't want them out like this. That would be kind of strange. Think about how an arm goes with the thumbs on the inside. So we're going to do like this, and we're going to attach it on the top. I'm going to put them like a little bit front of middle, like this, because we don't want it too far out to the side, so just a little bit in like this. So I'm just going to attach it by pinching it closed, and I'm just going to use a whip stitch like I've used for the seams throughout. And so I'm just gonna grab a little piece of the body and make sure it goes through both layers of the arm. And this looks kind of strange for right now, but in a few minutes we're going to give our gnome a hat, and that's going to cover up these pieces here. So even though it looks a little odd to just attach the arms to the body, it's not very anatomically correct for a human, but for a gnome it's just right. Alright, so as you can see, I have one arm here, a little bit to the front of the middle, because the middle is right here. So you can see I'm going to put them a little bit to the front. So I'm going to tie this one off. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to leave it sitting upright like I have it here, so I can see where I want it to sit on the other side. Just get my knot tied. And we'll position our arm like this, so make sure your gnome is sitting where you want him to. And then as soon as we're sure we're good with that, we'll attach it like this. And we'll tie it off like that. Oops. And that is starting to look like a gnome. So we have all the pieces we're gonna have made out of this fabric finished. So now we're ready to give our gnome a nose, and to do that we're either going to use a bead like this or a pom-pom in a piece of nylon like this, which is what I'm going to choose to use. Just a note about the bead: if you do use that, make sure that you do it so that the holes are on the sides like this rather than front and back. So you'll stitch that on just like this. I'm going to choose to use my pom-pom in this case. So our pom-pom is going to be positioned right in the middle between the arms. So you just check that, make sure you know where you're going to put it. And then you start by stitching through the back of your nylon. I made this nose by putting a pom-pom in a piece of nylon. I secured it with a piece of wire here, a twist tie. Then I snipped off the extra nylon. So I'm gonna do just like I did to attach the arms and check that I'm happy with where it's sitting. And then I just start stitching through. I try to catch it right around where the twist tie is into the bunchy part of the nylon there. If you catch a little bit of the pom-pom, that's fine too, as long as it's secure. You want to be sure that your thread, oops, is not going to show out the front of the nose. So again, just checking the position as you secure it, making sure you're happy with it. I like the nylon because you can kind of position it a little bit, give it a little bit more shape. The wooden bead is a little easier to sew on because it's just a bead, but it is a really set shape. So it depends on what your preference is as you're creating your gnome. But as long as I'm pretty sure it's secure, and it just about is, make sure I sew it a little bit on each side so it won't get lopsided. Once I'm pretty sure that it is how I like it, I'm going to just tie this off. It's good to give this one a double knot if you're using the nylons because it is easy to tear that. Just like that, we have our nose and it's starting to look like a gnome. So now we're ready to put together the gnome's hat. And so again, I am using a different color or pattern from the body piece just so it looks like he's wearing a hat that's separate. I like the contrast of having a different type of fabric. So this is a sweater knit that I'm using for this one, so it's a bit of a bigger weave, and I've got to be mindful of that as I'm putting it together. So I'm just going to fold it in half so that it is right sides together again. Being careful that I match up those corners there. There we go. And I have coordinating thread for this as well, doubled up. Now because this is a large weave, I'm not going to trust that my knot alone is going to catch it, so I am going to Let me zoom in so you can see this. I'm going to actually go right through the middle of these two to help tie it off a little bit more, as you can see here. And then pull it through like that to make sure it's not going to slip through, because this is, like I said, a very loose weave here. Alright, so we'll whip stitch down the seam of this just like we did our body pieces. This is a great project for beginners because it uses a lot of the same techniques over and over again. It also can be done with a lot of materials. It might just be around your craft room and around your house, because you can upcycle things you already have, like I mentioned at the beginning. Alright, so here's our hat, and I'm going to turn this right side out. And just to make sure I got the very end of it poked out the right way, I'm just going to grab, in this case it's my seam ripper in its case, but you could just grab a pencil or a pen, something like that, to just poke. Make sure you got it all the way out to the tippy end of it. There we go. Alright. So that is our hat. So now I'm going to stuff the hat so it'll sit upright, and this also gives the appearance of the rest of the gnome's head up underneath here. You can decide how much stuffing you want to give the hat depending on whether you want the hat to kind of flop over like this. So if you are thinking about how to put it on the gnome, as you can see here, without the stuffing, he looks awfully small-headed here. So we want the stuffing definitely around this part. But as far as whether you'd like his hat to stick upright or if you want it to like droop down, that's kind of your choice of how you do it. If you want it to sit upright, I recommend doing the fiber fill or batting all the way to the tip, like I'm going to show you. If you prefer that it droop like this, then I would recommend putting some more beans in this end of it so that it'll sit down, and then put stuffing in the rest so it'll kind of sit like this. So as I said, I want mine to sit upright, so I'm gonna just go ahead and fill mine all the way to the tip with fiber fill. And we want the biggest piece to be right inside because we want to give the illusion that the rest of the gnome's face is in there. So give a little stuffing to the end up here, but give a bigger bulge of stuffing right down at the bottom like this. So your hat should be kind of skinny at the top, a little bit fatter at the bottom like this. So to get the hat attached to the body, I think it's helpful to use a safety pin to kind of position it right, because you want your seams that you sewed to line up on the back, but it's more important to position the hat correctly on the front. So we're actually going to start by sewing the front of the hat, but just to make sure it doesn't wiggle too far off base, I'm actually going to pin it more or less to where it's going to sit on the back, just to help myself keep the position right. So I'm going to turn my hat around, and it's a little bit hard to show this so that it's easy to see, but it's important to pay attention to how the hat sits relative to the nose, especially, that you just put on. So being sure that that's positioned like you like it. So I'm actually going to start sewing around the shoulder or so of my gnome to make sure that this sits like I want it to. And so I'm going to start by sewing through the body and then through the hat like that. Feel free to use more than one safety pin if you find that to be a helpful strategy. So you're wanting to position your needle up under the hat so that your thread doesn't show too much on the outside, because it's the same color as the hat. It's not going to really show as you stitch. But it is contrasting with the sweater, so we want to be sure it's not showing there. So to attach the hat, I first safety pinned it all the way around just to kind of estimate where it needed to be. And I have started to tack it on in spots around. So rather than do a whip stitch or something that would leave a seam, I'm just choosing strategic spots to tack it to the body. So I'll show you how to do that. You find a spot where it would be good to secure it, and you run your needle up underneath, attached to the body, go up on the spot directly above that on the hat that you wish to tack, then go down right beside that and back through piece on the body. And by doing that, as you can see how I've done the front here, it makes it look like it's just sitting on his head rather than having a seam that you can see. So I'm going to continue to do that all the way around until the hat is attached. So now I'm going to put some embellishments on my gnome's hat, starting with a pom-pom on the top of his hat. So just like I did with the nose, I'm going to stick it through the pom-pom first and then through the tip here, like that. Kind of position it where I want it, and just make several loops through. This is totally optional, but I think it's really cute, and you could also do like a jingle bell or something like that if that's more your preference. The other embellishment I'm going to give my Santa's hat is going to be a button, just a nice little feature there. So I'm just going to pick a place for it, kind of on the side of his hat here. And you could give him some ribbon or just about anything you want. I think a button looks cool there. So I'm going to do that. Now our hat is done. Okay, so now we have to give our Santa a beard. So I have approximately cut a beard shape, even though I'm going to trim it some more once I have it in place. It's easier to do once I have a look at what it looks like on here. So just like I did with my hat, I think it's good to position it about like I want it and secure it with a safety pin as I get it attached, just so that it doesn't wiggle too much. And so I'm going to kind of make sure it's where I want it. And I'm just going to pin it right here in the middle to the body. Okay. Now the trick is to try to stitch it as much as possible up under the edge of the hat, over the shoulder, under the nose, and also know that as you cut the fur, anything that's not secured is just going to come loose. It makes a big mess. That's just how it is to work with craft fur. So have a lint roller handy for the end of your project. You're probably going to need to do that when you're done. Alright, so the thing about fur is it has this woven stretchy stuff on the back, and that's what the fur is sewn into. So that's what we have to attach to our gnome. And it also, if I can zoom in a little, has about one row of stitching where there is no fur, because it's always going to come loose from that top row. So just know that that's going to be kind of your anchor point as you get ready to sew on. Okay, so I'm just going to start on one end, anchor it first to the body, and then catch a little bit of the beard. It's good to do that loop to knot it like we've been doing for other parts, just to be sure that it's on there securely. So I'm going to tack the beard on somewhat like I did the hat, but it's going to have more attachment points than the hat did. So like I said, we're going to just kind of tuck it up under the hat, anchoring the beard to the body. Don't sweat it if you pull out a little bit of fur as you go. That's going to tend to happen. And it's good to kind of hold the nose up as you sew this part to make sure that you get it anchored right up underneath. Alright. And then as you get to the last little bit, kind of find the corner of the triangle, and that'll be where we tie it off. make sure that you tie it off anchored to the body for extra security. Okay, so now we can unpin the beard. It's nice and secured on there. We got to give it a little bit of grooming to make sure it is tidy and shaped as well as we want it to. So we kind of brush it out, pull any loose bits that are not going to hang on there, because some of it's going to come loose as you sew, like I mentioned, and that's okay. We have plenty of fluff left. Alright, so one thing to consider is how tall your Santa is. So it's a little bit hard to see from this view, but it's good to sit him upright and decide how long it should be. And mine, as you can see from the top view, kind of curves onto the table, and that's a little bit too long. So I'm just going to take my scissors and give it a little bit of a trim. And just keep brushing it and trimming it until it looks right. I recommend trimming it kind of conservatively, because once it's cut you can't get it back, but you do want to make sure it takes the shape you prefer. And it's good to kind of brush it out to make sure that it is trimmed somewhat in that triangle shape, because as you can see we got some long bits here. I want to trim that a little bit better so that it doesn't hang over quite as much. Okay. So, one last check of the beard to make sure I'm happy with that. And I think that looks a lot better. Again, I recommend kind of lint rolling a little bit once you're done, because it does get fuzzies everywhere. Okay, the last thing that we need to do here is give Santa some gifts to carry. So I have a little square of burlap here that I'm going to use to make a sack. And I'm going to do that just by sort of folding the triangle in half and then sort of tucking it like this to make a little bit of a package like that. Looks like a little bit like an ice cream cone. So I'm going to start actually on the bottom tip and sew that together, so you can kind of overlap them a little bit like this. You want to make sure you start with a very solid grid of burlap, and I would recommend tying off a knot like this to make sure it's secure. And then just use kind of a whip stitch to put together the package like this. This doesn't have to be super secure, it's just to hold it together enough so that the items inside of it won't fall out. And then I'm actually just gonna go right back down to where I started to tie it off. To make really sure that I have it secure. Alright, so that's our little bag like this. And then in it we're going to give a little tiny Christmas tree, which we're going to decorate with a little string of garland. So we'll just kind of tuck that down in there. And then I'm also gonna sew in a couple of jingle bells. Just tie them together as a bunch. Seems like something Santa should have. Feel free to give Santa whatever props you think would be appropriate. Miniature gifts would be cute. Whatever you have on hand in your Christmas decorations would be very nice additions. So I'm just going to string up a couple of jingle bells like this. Then I'm just going to set my jingle bells kind of in the front like this. And I'm just going to stitch it to the bag so they don't fall out. Just helps the bag look nice and full. So as you can see there, we have our full little bag of gifts for Santa to hold. Put this in Santa's arm so he can hold it. So I still have my thread from where I was stitching on the jingle bells to make sure they didn't fall out. So now we're just gonna put Santa's arm kind of around it like this. In fact, I'm gonna position my thread so it comes out right about the place where his arm would go. fix his beard right like we want it, and then hold his arm where we would want it to be. And then you can kind of put just a couple of tacking stitches right in his arm like this. You'll need to put at least one stitch through the body to make sure that his arm stays bent like that. Don't worry too much about what's in the bag if it's in your way. We can adjust that once we get it attached right. It's just good to have it in there before we start sewing to get a sense of how full the bag is. And as you can see, we have Santa with his bag of presents ready to go. You can always reposition a little bit and tidy him up. But there you have it. I'll zoom out so we can see all the way. We have our Santa Gnome complete. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you have a very happy holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you again in our future sewing programs.